and a warm welcome to episode 10 of Hocus Focus. I'm Sara Mondaini.
And I'm Thomas Sheridan.
And we are back in action. And I want to express my gratitude for your understanding and support regarding last week. Not feeling great tonight, but I've got my box of tricks here to see me through. I've got my vitamin C, which I'm drinking in copious amounts. I've got my peppermint tea, and I've got this to keep me warm because I can't get warm at all. So I've got that there, just out of sight, keeping me warm. But I'm still vertical, and despite appearances and looking a bit woozy, I am excited to be back in the saddle. And it's going to be another hectic week for me, as I've been preparing for 2 interviews with 2 very interesting guests for my channel. And those interviews will be filmed and uploaded very soon. There won't be a witching hour segment this week, but I am pleased to say that one is in the pipeline within the next few weeks. So just watch this space for that. And tonight, as always, we've got a range of topics to explore from the Fortean realm, along with our regular reviews and psychic segments. And as always, your insights and contributions in both the live chat and the comments really do enhance the show. So I do extend my thanks for being an active part of our community. And before we dive into our discussions tonight, Thomas, how's your week been and what have you been up to?
Well, I haven't been a real trooper like you, but, you know, the whole show must go on thing. But I've been mad busy, and I'll be mad busy until probably near December. But it's all good, it's all productive, and it's all about plans for the future. So, laying foundations as well as working as well. So it's a busy time of year for me. So thanks again for hosting the shows on Wuthering Nights. I appreciate that, but we'll get back in the swing later.
Yeah, when it's when you're building something, you don't mind being overworked, being overproductive. It's a good thing. You don't feel it as much, so it's all good. And for our first topic tonight, we are looking into a prime number that has deep esoteric and symbolic meaning across the world, from creation and religion to mysticism and the cycles of life. And we're looking into the symbolism and mysticism surrounding the prime number 7, and it can be found everywhere. And I'm going to start with the human body. 7 obvious parts to the human body, including the head, chest, abdomen, 2 arms and 2 legs. And we have 7 main internal organs: the stomach, liver, heart, lungs, spleen, and 2 kidneys. And even the head externally has 7 sensory parts with 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, and a mouth. And not only that, but our bodies also excrete 7 excretions, if you like, from 7 exits on the body. We've got tears from 2 eyes, mucus from both nostrils, saliva from the mouth, semen from male genitalia, and sweat from our skin. And the number 7 is also present in the 7-day female menstrual cycle, which aligns with the 4-week lunar month, connecting the number 7 to the natural rhythm of the female menstrual cycle. And as well as the human body, we see the number 7 in the 7 colours of the rainbow with the full spectrum of light. In spirituality, we have 7 chakras, each linked to different aspects of the human energy system. We've got 7 days of the week, which we use to structure our lives. And we have the 7 wonders of the world as examples of human achievements. The number 7 also holds great significance in several major religions. In Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity, 7 plays a big role in their teachings and rituals, which signify spiritual completeness. In Christianity, it's associated with the 7 deadly sins, 7 layers of purgatory, and the 7 sacraments in the Catholic Church. The Book of Revelations is adorned with 7s, including 7 stars, 7 trumpets, 7 seals, 7 angels, 7 churches, and 7 plagues. The number 7 is deeply rooted within the ancient texts of the Hindu Vedas. In the Rig Veda, there are references to 7 heavenly fortresses, and the 7 rays of the sun highlight its radiance and significance in Hindu cosmology. The concept of 7 seasons, showing a connection between nature and spirituality. 7 benevolent gods embody various facets of divinity and grace within the Hindu belief. And the idea of 7 races of man would suggest the evolution of humanity. The division of the world into 7 parts, and we've got the god Agni, the deity of fire, who's associated with 7 wives, mothers, or sisters, each symbolizing aspects of fire's power and purity, and is said to produce 7 flames. During a Hindu wedding ceremony, the bride and groom take part in a ritual where they walk around the sacred fire 7 times, and each walk around symbolizes different vows and promises that they make to each other, which reinforces the sanctity and unity of their marriage. And after completing the 7 times around the fire, the couple also take 7 steps together, which is said to represent their journey in life, with each step being a specific aspiration, such as happiness, understanding, and companionship. In Buddhism, the number 7 also has significant spiritual meaning. The story of the Maya, the mother of Siddhartha Gautama, the original Buddha, is said to have passed away 7 days after giving birth to Siddhartha. And according to Buddhist teachings, there are 7 parts of enlightenment, each representing an important part of the spiritual journey. And these include mindfulness, keen investigation of Dharma or truth, energy, happiness, calmness, concentration, and tranquility. And these parts guide the Buddhist practitioners towards the ultimate goal of enlightenment and self-realization. There are also 7 distinct notes in the musical scale surrounding a range of tones and semitones, and these notes are the very foundation of melody and harmony in the building blocks of musical compositions across the world. In the world of literature, Shakespeare presents his perspective on life's stages. In the 7 ages of man, it outlines the different phases of a person's life, from infancy to old age, and these stages reflect the human experience and the journey of existence. In the Jewish tradition, the menorah and the number 7 are important. The menorah is a 7-branched candelabrum, which has a significant symbolism in Jewish culture and religion. And the 7 candles of the menorah represent the days of creation, as described in the book of Genesis, and it symbolizes the divine act of creation and the spiritual illumination that the light brings. And over to ancient Egypt now, they believe in the existence of 7 paths to heaven, offering a means for the departed souls to ascend to the afterlife. And these pathways were important in their understanding of the journey beyond life. The idea of 7 heavenly cows represents the concept of celestial abundance and prosperity. And it's believed that Osiris led the souls of the departed through 7 halls of the underworld, guiding them on their journey towards the afterlife. In the ancient cult of Mithra, the number 7 held deep spiritual significance also, and followers of the Mithric cult believed that the soul's journey to paradise was guided by passing through 7 planetary spheres, and each of these spheres represented a celestial realm, and the soul's ascent through these 7 spheres signified its ultimate path to a heavenly state. And then we have superstitions and folklore attached to the number 7. The superstition that breaking a mirror brings 7 years of bad luck is a common belief in many cultures. And in Iran, an interesting variation of the belief is that a cat possesses 7 lives, not the more widespread idea of 9 lives. And now continuing on to ancient medical traditions, and here the number 7 has a very important meaning too. In the Hippocratic tradition of medicine, 7 was the boss. According to these teachings, there were 7 rules governing illnesses of the body, And one was that illnesses could follow a specific pattern, with painful illnesses lasting either 7, 14, or 21 days. In Jewish magic, it was believed that a fever could be cured through a specific ritual, and this involved gathering 7 prickles from 7 palm trees, 7 chips from 7 beams, 7 nails from 7 bridges, 7 ashes from 7 ovens, and 7 hairs from the beard of an old dog. The idea of the song of the spiritual 3 and the material 4 equals 7 is a good representation that 7 bridges the gap between the spiritual and the material worlds, and that would explain the number significance with the journey to the other world within ancient Egypt. The number 7 also goes into our understanding of memory and human cognition. In 1956, George Miller's research showed that most people can retain approximately 7 items of information in their short-term memory. This Miller's law suggests that 7 is a natural limit to our short-term memory capacity. Although centuries earlier, in the 16th century, Italian Jesuit theologian Robert Bellarmine noted that individuals could not remember more than 7 of anything. The belief in the natural limit of our memory could come from the idea that 7 symbolizes totality and fullness of the human experience. And again, in ancient Egypt, the number 7 was important to measurement and construction. 7 was the basis for the royal cubit, which is a unit of measure that shaped the construction of their various structures, from buildings and monuments. And this standardization brought them precision and consistency. Now, the common cubit was divided into 6 palms, each consisting of 4 fingers, totaling 24 digits. But the royal cubit was divided into 7 palms, each with 4 fingers, totaling 28 digits. And the philosopher Pythagoras gave his view on human life, divided into 10 stages of 7 years each. The first 7 years are marked by the appearance of the milk teeth, which signifies early childhood development. In the second 7-year stage, male and female fertility is acquired with the onset of puberty and adolescence. Physical maturity is attained during the third of the 7 years, showing the completion of physical growth and development. And the fourth of the 7-year period sees physical strength reach its peak, which is the prime of one's physical capabilities. In the fifth 7 years, that marks the season of marriage, suggesting a time when individuals usually establish families. And in the sixth 7-year period, intelligence matures, reflecting the growth of cognitive abilities and knowledge. Reason matures in the 7th year phase with the development of critical thinking and decision-making skills. And in the 8th period of 7 years, we see the perfection of both physical and intellectual attributes, showing a well-rounded stage of life and human being. And in the 9th 7-year period, passions become more gentle, which means a sense of emotional maturity and wisdom. And the final 7-year stage represents the end of desirable life, which is the inevitability of the aging process. And finally, to round off the number 7, it plays a central role in chemistry. The periodic table of chemical elements is structured in a series of groups, and each group typically contains 7 elements. The arrangement of periods or groups led to the name periodic table, showing the organized pattern of elements in the natural world. So there you go, a quick whistle-stop tour of the significance of the number 7 throughout the ages. And I know there's much more to the number 7, and it seems to be connected from the physical, spiritual, and esoteric to creation and the building blocks of life.
That was a quick whistle-stop tour. It blew my mind. That was an extravaganza of 7s. I'm just seriously impressed. But I can add some more to it, okay? And forgive me, you mentioned so many things there. Forgive me if I cover the same things. So Walter Scott once said that if you have an object for 7 years, you will definitely find a use for it. In the Mata Upanishads of the Hindu, the Vedic tradition, it's a belief that thought originates from 7 concepts of cognition. An old shipwright saying, an old shipbuilders or shipwright saying is, measure something, a piece of wood, 7 times before you cut it. The geometric shapes symbolic of 7 is called the heptagon, Heptadgon. The heptagon is the first geometric shape, not the only one, sorry, that is not derived from the Vesica Pisces in the same way the hexagon or the pentagon is, which makes it very interesting. It's kind of like that first magical shape outside reality. It can be constructed from within the Vesica Pisces, but cannot be constructed from the Vesica Pisces growing out like a sacred flower, as they do in sacred geometry. Now, 7 is also associated with the heptagon. The heptagon as 7 units is very common in Grecian art, and depictions of the goddess Athena is often done in a geometric form of 7s. 7 is also the number of planets visible to the naked eye. 7 is also the numbers of fingers that Cuchulainn was said to have on each hand in some of the Irish mythological cycle. 7 is also, you mentioned that 7 was used to measure musical scales. Botticelli's painting, The Birth of Venus, actually correlates with 7 notes in terms of its geometric setup. And 7 is also the unit of measure used for spectrographs or bandwidth. So it's each one from visible light to infrared or beyond are measured in units of 7. The reason for this is that when Isaac Newton started playing around prisms first, visible light, not the visible spectrum, but the entirety of visible light, he discovered was measured in 7 units. So 7 is an incredible number. I don't think there's anything out there that actually even comes close to it in terms of its meanings. And there's also the thing of a 7th son of a 7th son. I'm not particularly sure what that is, but the recent thing about Jimmy Savile, he was a 7th son of a 7th son. Now, they were trying to point out it was some kind of negative thing, but I always thought the 7th son of a 7th son was, a fortuitous thing, like the genius or something, or the gifted one in the family.
I'd heard the 7th son of a 7th son. I think it might have been a biblical reference. It was something to do with the Antichrist was going to be the 7th son of a 7th son.
Isn't the 7th seal? Don't they open 7 seals to of the apocalypse or something like that? The 7 shows up all over Hebrew and biblical things. It's everywhere. It's like I said in the menorah, but it's all over like the Hebrew and the Torah and the Old Testament. And then it's the 7th wave, that famous. It's supposed to be the wave that if you jump onto the 7th wave, it carries you out to sea. And that was also in the movie Papillon, where Steve McQueen escapes from the island, Devil's Island, by jumping on the 7th wave and being carried out in the ocean.
And not forgetting the 7 wonders of the ancient world, in addition to the new 7 wonders of the world.
7 is also associated with virginity and virgins. I don't know why that is, but it is. It's associated with it. There's by Censorius, a 3rd century AD Roman scholar, said, on account of Pythagoras kept the lyre with him to make music before going to sleep, and upon waking, and always to imbue his soul with its divine quality, it had 7 strings. So Pythagoras believed that the lyre, and it was also that Apollo's lyres often has 7 strings as well, that the most beautiful music was made from 7 strings in terms of what they call sympathetic resonance, where one string bounces off another.
I just want to bring some folklore into it here. There's a famous folklore story called the 7 League Boots. It's a European folk tale, and in that story, These magical boots allowed the wearer to cover 7 leagues, which is about 21 miles. She's 3 sevens to 21 with each stride, and either escape from danger or to catch up and take down danger.
Philo, the Alexandrian philosopher in 20 BC, said that nature delights in the number 7. A Babylonian ziggurat pyramid has 7 steps always. The Statue of Liberty has 7 rays coming out of her crown, comparable to the Apollo god, who always has shown with 7. That's why there's a conspiracy theory, which I kind of believe in, that that's actually a man's face, and it's actually Apollo and not Lady Liberty.
You've got the 7 dwarfs, Snow White and the 7 dwarfs.
Yep.
7 hills of Rome.
Yep, it just goes on and on. It's just a remarkable number. There's corporations that use the 7 number, 7 Up, Seagram 7, and they back in the 70s in that film like Saturday Night Fever, they drink a 7 and 7. That's Seagram 7 whiskey or bourbon with a 7 Up. 7-Eleven. The sound of the word in English has a musical quality to it, 7. So it flows off the tongue.
Also rhymes with heaven. You got 7th heaven.
7th heaven, yeah.
When you're in a blissful state. One interesting one that grabbed my attention was the 7 Horcruxes in Harry Potter.
I don't know anything about Harry Potter.
Right. Yeah. Well, in the Harry Potter story, across the whole story, Voldemort splits his soul into 7 parts, which creates 7 Horcruxes, which are objects where a wizard can hide a fragment of his soul, and that allows them to achieve a form of immortality, because the soul remains tethered to the physical world even if the body's destroyed. And these pieces were hidden in various objects, making it really difficult to defeat Voldemort. And Harry Potter himself became a Horcrux for Voldemort when the Dark Lord's killing curse rebounded during an attempted murder. There you go, another warning not to play with curses that you shouldn't be messing with.
Speaking of curses, the sigil of Lucifer, I've been told, is the heptagon that has been rearranged in a different way. And also 7 is used in a lot of sailors' knots in terms of 7 movements and stuff like that. We've been talking about that lately. And John Mitchell said, I don't know who it is, I think he's a philosopher, a 7-sided figure impossible to draw with perfect mathematical precision. And if you try to do it, you are absolutely sure to find your efforts treated with derision. And yet there are philosophers who readily declare that nothing in this world is really true. And so I've drawn the heptagon by triangle and square, for any human purpose will do. That was John Mitchell. Now, the heptagon, they also say you can't use the 3 tools to do it: a straight line, a right angle, and a compass. So it's weird. It's weird. 7 is like outside. You know, Shakespeare said, all is uneven and everything is left at 6s and 7s.
It is a strange one, because as you go through numbers, you always find that people throughout the ages, especially the ancient times, they like neat, tidy numbers, like the number 12, where you've got 12 signs of the zodiac, because it's nice and neat and it's easily divisible. And they didn't seem to like odd numbers because they didn't sit neatly in a box, so to speak. But the number 7 just seems to be everywhere throughout the ancients. I mean, even the cubit, the common cubit in ancient Egypt was 6 palms with 4 fingers, which was 24, and again all nice, neat, even numbers. But then the royal cubit had the 7 palms with 4 fingers, which was 28.
You really could go on forever, couldn't you?
You could. And you've got Lucky Sevens again. That's a game in the casinos.
Yeah, and then isn't there in rugby? There's a Super Sevens is a type of rugby that girls play.
I've heard of Super Sevens. I don't know what. Yeah.
I think it's a girls' rugby game. Yeah, women. Sorry. If people are wondering what book I'm referencing here, I've reviewed it in one of the early Hocus Focus. It's a beginner's guide to constructing the universe, the mathematical archetypes of nature, art, and science, a voyage from 1 to 10 by Michael S. Schneider. If you're wondering where I'm getting the information from, very useful book to do anything with numbers and geometry and things like that.
I have that book too.
It's great, isn't it?
A good
I
one,
love
yeah.
it. I love his writing style. He comes and I met him years ago. God, it must be 12, 13 years ago now. He was interviewed on Red Ice. And he came across a really great guy. He was lots of fun and very jovial.
The number 7 is also classed as a lucky number for people in general. Lucky number 7. In bingo, I think it's not lucky number 7.
The Seven Brides for Seven Brothers.
Yes.
That was a movie with David Soul back years ago.
And was Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat? Did he have 7 colours on his Technicolor Dreamcoat?
I think so, yeah. I think you're right about that, yeah.
The colours of the rainbow.
I wore a coat of 7 colors. Ah, I know that because I did it in school.
Me too. I as well, yeah.
I wasn't Joseph. I think I played the devil or something.
I bet I was just in the bloody
But
court.
it's got great songs in it. I remember it had great songs in it, that play, that musical.
Yeah, it was before the days of Jason Donovan, before he killed it.
Yeah. The Seven Deadly Sins.
Yes.
Film with Brad Pitt and Kevin Spacey. Seven was about that. Quite a very, very dark film.
Yes.
Yeah. The Seven Seas.
Yes. 7 continents.
Yeah. Seven Seas. Great song by Echo and the Bunnymen.
It was quite relevant in Theosophy.
Is it?
Yeah, something to do with the 7 races of man and 7 sub-races of man. And it's to do with going through spheres again.
Well, that goes through the 7 ages of man again. That kind of comes from a similar idea. I think the Orient 7 is quite a powerful number as well.
Now, I remember when I was learning about the chakras many, many years ago, I remember like the 7 chakras. And as we talked about in the 7 ages of man, you've got the first 7 years, and you've got 40 up to 14 years, 21 years, 28 years, until you get to the 7th chakra, you're at 49 years. And then apparently you then go back to the first chakra, which would put you at 50 years there. And that apparently, now don't shoot the messenger, is why a lot of men have midlife crises around the age of 50, because they've regressed back to that first chakra, and they become childlike again and start to become adolescent again. So they go running around after younger women and can't understand why they're not interested in them.
The midlife crisis and all that, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, serpents are often jewel serpents, like you have on the medical symbol. That's also shown in Sumerian sculptures in 7, and Aztecs, where you have intertwining serpents. There's usually 7, not 7, intertwines. The Egyptian goddess Sehat, she's represented with 7 crowns of 7 rays, similar to the Statue of Liberty, and they represent wisdom and intelligence.
So that is the number 7, and we've touched on its significance in different cultures and aspects of the world, but I'm sure that you have some perspective and insights to offer us, and that's the beauty of discussions like these. It's the opportunity to exchange ideas. So please share your thoughts and experiences, or questions and opinions on this intriguing topic, and please continue the conversation, and feel free to mention anything that we've missed in the discussion with regards to the mystical number 7.
I just remember another one. The movie The Magnificent Seven was based on the Japanese film The Seven Samurai. So The Magnificent Seven, and there was also a song by The Clash called a brilliant song called The Magnificent Seven.
It's a magnificent number.
It has to be, yeah.
This week, we are reviewing the 1966 Hammer horror Dracula, Prince of Darkness, directed by Terence Fisher. And it's the third in the Hammer films' Dracula-inspired movies. And the film opens with a recap of the demise of Dracula in the 1958 horror of Dracula, with Peter Cushing playing Van Helsing as he opens up the curtains on the sunlight and Dracula becomes no more. And it then cuts to a decade later, where the story follows two English couples who find themselves at Castle Dracula during a journey through the eerie Carpathian Mountains. And despite warnings from the locals, they become caught in a nightmare as the undead Count Dracula is revived with the help of his familiar named Clove in this film. And in the film, Barbara Shelley, Thomas's favourite, plays the character Helen Kent. And she was the one who sensed that something was amiss at the castle and she wanted to leave immediately. But her companions dismissed her fears and apprehensions, and they just saw her as being nothing but her usual overly cautious and nervous self. And Helen's reluctance to visit the castle was obvious, but I think their fate was already sealed before this, when Dracula's horse-drawn carriage arrives under the guise of the cavalry come to save the day. And when the coach brought them to the castle, Helen still protests about going in, but then the rest of the group accept the hospitality, and that seals their doom. But you could say the doom was already set in motion the moment they were stranded on the road, which was a long time before they even got near the castle's gates. The film is full of traditional Hammer Gothic horror with fancy sets, fancy costumes, heaving bosoms, and vampiric evil. And as with many of the Dracula films, it's only loosely based on Bram Stoker's original tale, especially with the portrayal of Dracula. And this time, the Count remains silent throughout the film. But despite that, Christopher Lee's screen presence and his charisma are still brilliant. And he personifies Dracula with this malevolent elegance, and he uses his expressions to communicate his character's menace. And even after watching again, after all these years, it's still amazing how well that Lee plays Dracula without a single spoken word. And he's just got this towering presence and this piercing gaze through the bloodshot eyes, and the way that he moved around unseen. It's all perfect to the atmosphere. And while he's hardly on screen, his silent portrayal dominates the film, because when he isn't in shot, you're left wondering where he is all the time, and he's in your mind all the time, and you're waiting for him to show up unexpectedly as the dusk falls and the nighttime comes. For me, though, Christopher Lee remains the most iconic Dracula in cinema, and despite his minimal screen time and no dialogue, it's still a great film. Whereas Dracula with Gary Oldman also holds a special place for me as my favourite Dracula film, because it's the one that stays most faithful to the original story and portrays the love story that has seen him cross oceans of time to find Mina. The Hammer Dracula films with Christopher Lee, however, are the ones that left the impression on me during childhood. They were the ones that scared me to death and gave me nightmares and made me look under the bed. And so it'll always be in my nostalgic memories when I look back on old Dracula films. And to wrap up, I just want to say that regarding the dispute, there was a dispute in the film about Christopher Lee's decision to not speak in this film. And he explained his stance on that, saying that upon reading the script and observing the dialogue, he told Hammer that he had no intention of saying those lines, and he made it clear that he wouldn't be delivering any of the written dialogue. But then there's a dispute over this because the screenwriter, Jimmy Sangster, had a different perspective in his memoir called Inside Hammer, and he argued that vampires don't chat, and therefore he intentionally refrained from writing any dialogue for Lee in the script. So who knows what it was, but whoever's decision it was, it worked very well for the film.
The story I heard about Christopher Lee not talking in the film was that the studio kept saying to him, come back to do another Dracula. And he was like, I don't want to be typecast. I want to do other things, blah, blah, blah. And they promised him that this Dracula Prince of Darkness would be faithful to the Bram Stoker novel. And it wasn't at all. And apparently that's the story I heard, that he was like, well, I'm not saying those lines because you basically got me into the film on the sly. And also they didn't pay him a lot. He was getting more money doing bit parts in Hollywood films and things like that. Now, that was the first Hammer film I saw as a kid, about 11. And I often wonder if my love this day of folk horror, or even maybe even the 40 and the paranormal, would that have ever happened if I hadn't seen Dracula, Prince of Darkness? Because that film, from the opening scene of the young girl about to be, vampire staked by the peasantry, to, I think it's Andrew Kerr plays the Monsignor, or the brother. That's interesting about him, and Barbara Shelley were both in Quatermass, filmed around the same time. And it also goes to show you what a brilliant actress Barbara Shelley was, because in Quatermass she plays this young science minx, this sexy science girl, right? Like a go-go girls, as they call them in the 60s. And then, made at the same time, more or less, within Dracula, Prince of Darkness, she comes across as a prudish middle-aged woman, and really is believable as that. And the films are made at the same time, which is just outstanding. It's just remarkable. Now, the film, to me, it is. If someone said to me, what is the archetypal Hammer horror film, I would say Dracula, Prince of Darkness. Beyond the doubt, it's also must have been shocking at the time, because I remember watching it as a little kid the first time with my mother, and my mother had seen it in the cinema when she was in her 20s, and she was screaming at the scene where Christopher Lee appears at the top of the stairs, and he has that kind of like reptilian smile, and the scene where Clove, my master was a most generous man, where he slits the guy's throat over the ashes. Even today, that's pretty heavy. The sound of that, of the knife going through the jugular vein, and then it's spilling in bright, almost fluorescent red into the ashes, where it reanimates, and it's still, even by today's standards, special effects look great. Where he reanimates from a kind of like skull to a half human to a full Dracula, and it's just amazing. And Barbara Shelley, she goes out early in the film, but she comes back as a vampire chick later. You also have a fantastic portrayal of the Renfield type character in the monastery. You have, it's just an all-round cast, very funny scenes. The Andrew Kerr as the monk, I think it's Andrew Kerr, is fabulous, and also kind of funny, where he comes into the pub and starts slacking off all the locals that are afraid of him. The gunsling, that was all that, so that's one of my fantasies. If I wanted to be a gunslinging monk or a gunslinging priest, that was always like something when I always thought, like, if I wasn't in this life, I would like it to live in the Wild West or Mexico with a rifle underneath my pancho. And I think I probably got that from the father in Dracula, Prince of Darkness, with his rifle underneath his smock, or whatever you call the monkish clothes. The film's climax on the ice, where he shoots the water and goes under, that's really well done, and again has a kind of an animalistic, feral nature to it. The Dracula that he plays in this one is not as sophisticated. He looks kind of like high class and aristocratic, but his movements and his gestures are animalistic, feral, wild, this kind of thing. And you can't fault it. It's just so good. If you've never seen a Hammer film, Dracula, Prince of Darkness is the one. It will make you fall in love with the genre. It definitely made me fall in love with it. The soundtrack is fabulous, and the way it continues on from the previous film, that fantastic scene where Peter Cushing makes the sign of the cross with the two candelabras, is just like, wow, So I think later on in his life, Christopher Lee was very proud of all those films. But at the time, he was under all kinds of pressure to make them, and Hammer didn't pay well, and he often did it out of friendship. And he was told things. Another thing that happened was they said, Hammer's on the point of bankruptcy, and there's about 200 people are going to lose their job if you don't play Dracula. So they used to guilt him into playing the part. So it was, because he'd made friends with all the crew and the staff there, and the tea ladies, and he didn't want to see them lose their jobs, and he was their the goose that laid their golden egg. So, but later on in life, in his book Prince of Darkness, his biography, he comes to look back very, by the 70s, he was looking back very fondly on that period. But yeah, it's great. I can't, it's just, and it's beautiful looking as well, and it has Barbara Shelley. What more do you want?
I thought one of the most chilling parts of that film was on all those films is whatever it is they use for the blood. I don't know if it's tomato soup or red paint or what it is. But it's very thick and gloopy and it has little lumps in it. And you think, my God, if that came out of his body, really, it looks like he's full of blood clots or something. What on earth? But it's so thick and bubbly and gloopy. It's just horrible. I think it's more effective than even the
It
most
has an almost
scenes
it has
today.
an almost corrosive effect when it hits Dracula's ashes. Did you notice that? It's
Yeah,
almost like acidic or something.
yeah.
Yeah, and so red and so bubbly.
And very bright. And it's almost like, I don't know, you think, God, you could almost smell that. It's horrible. Do you know what I mean? It really pops off the screen at you, and it's like no matter what's going on the screen, this fluid, this blood is just what you're focused on. Horrible, horrible. But a fabulous film. I really enjoyed it, and as I say, it was one of all the Dracula films from the Hammer genre. Frightened me as a child. I was allowed to watch them. BBC Two, I think it was, on a Friday night. There was a double bill, and I was always allowed to watch those. I'll always be grateful for that, being allowed to do that. And I used to go to bed terrified. I used to pretend I was fine, otherwise I won't be able to watch it next week. But I used to get in bed really scared.
It educated me. It educated me in a lot of ways. I never heard of the Carpathians. I didn't know that Dracula was a real thing. The first time I probably saw that kind of Germanic type writing, like the title. I've never heard music like dun 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 dun, that kind of dark music. I'd never seen things like that. Even the way Barbara Shelley gets the stake through her heart is very violent and all this stuff. And the way, the father says to the brother-in-law, this is not your sister-in-law. This is an animal. This is like and then when she dies, she looks like she's at peace, like she's virginal or something,
Yeah.
lying there. She's now in heaven with the angels. I can't understate the influence and the impression that made on me when I was 10, 11 years old. And all good. I mean, it didn't scare me or frighten me. It was just like, it was thrilling and exciting and luxurious. The rich colors and the castles and how everything looked. And your man Clove was fantastic as well. I'm sorry to startle you, sir. This kind of thing. Come quickly, madam, come quickly, your husband. My master was known in these parts for his hospitality. It's just he was great. The guy, the concept of the butler was great. I thought that part really worked, and the actor played a blinder.
And those horror films from the Dracula films from the Hammer Horror was the stories that turned me to Bram Stoker's book as I got older, turned my interest to the original story. So
yeah, it got me into horror comics like the Warren Creepy and Eerie comics, Vampirella and Morbius, who was the Hammer vampire and the Marvel vampire. Yeah, I mean, to say it opened, and then like building the plastic model kits from Aurora. I mean, it opened up a world to me that I'm still involved in to this day, and has enriched my life tremendously. So thank you, Hammer, and Christopher Lee and everyone else in that film for the film. It was just so powerful, and has brought nothing but enrichment to my life.
I think every time we decide to do a film each week, when the Hammer genre gets mentioned, I always think, oh yeah, let's do another Hammer, because I do one every week if we could get away with it.
Well, yeah, there's so many of them, and they're not all necessarily in that kind of. There's films like She with Ursula Andress, 1,000,000 Years BC with Raquel Welch. There's just so many of them that are in that world, but not necessarily in the kind of like classic Hammer horror thing. But there's no end to them. Yeah, I mean that's how I feel too. But we're not going to do it next week. We're going to do a film next week. We're not going to tell you that the director was very inspired by Hammer, and but that's about all I'm going to tell you for now. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I honestly couldn't imagine the horror genre in movies. You know, people go about the Universal monsters from the 1930s, the Lon Chaney, the Boris Karloffs, and you know, the Bela Lugosi and all that stuff. Yeah, fabulous, brilliant. I mean, that was a huge part of that growth. Those films, the reason why Hammer came out was because those Universal monsters were being broadcast as a thing called creature features on American syndicated television. You have in America, you have like the main networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, those big ones, right? But you also have these syndicated stations. You know, like in New York, it was Channel 9 and 11 and Channel 5, which later became Fox. But they used to feature these old Universal horror films on a Saturday night for basically teenagers who didn't have dates or would have, you know, pajama parties. And they were such an enormous success that they made so much money for these film companies. And they were already by that stage 30, 40 years old, that Hammer went into the horror film just for the cash in on it. And they basically owned it, you know, eventually.
I think Hammer did for the horror genre what the Carry On films did for the comedy genre. They just brought it to life and brought it to everybody to enjoy.
Yeah, and the British film industry was so prolific back then. You know, you had, you know, not just those two, but so many other things. And you had independent horror films made outside the Hammer studio as well. It, and I believe the band Black Sabbath got their idea for doing what they call horror. I mean, Ozzy Osbourne said, you know, everyone's watching horror films now. You know, yeah, why don't we make horror music? And that's where Black Sabbath's idea of horror, and there was a film called Black Sabbath, but the actual concept, I think they all went to see a Hammer film in Birmingham and came out and says, look, the people are obsessed with this horror stuff. There's no horror rock, and that's where Black Sabbath came from. It was Geezer Butler, the bass player, who came up with the idea. Let's become a horror rock band, you know.
Just makes you wonder how many other artists and people it inspired to do what they did.
Oh, loads. I mean, you know, a lot of goth movement would have been from that. I mean, you hear them talking about, you know, I was into French surrealist theater, but you just know, like the Peter Murphy from Bauhaus and Susie Sue were like glued to those Hammer films growing up, no doubt about it. And you know, and in America, people like Alice Cooper, you know, like they say, oh, I'm into the French theater macabre, but I bet they were obsessed with those stuff too as well. If you haven't watched a Hammer film and you want to learn about Hammer, watch this one.
There's plenty of them on YouTube as well if you go searching around. So they are available. You don't have to purchase them. They are out there. I'm not sure if this one is on YouTube or not, but there's lots of them out there on YouTube.
You can pick up the DVDs, often with the extras extremely cheap on places like eBay.
Yeah, they're good to have in the collection. Those are
Yeah,
key.
I have loads of them. I have loads of them.
Go check it out and then come back here and tell us what you thought in the comments.
And then tell us what other Hammer films you'd like us to cover.
Yes, we want more Hammer horror films.
There's a song by Kate Bush again. She's another one who always shows up Hammer horror.
Yes, with the bright red lipstick and
Yeah.
the very dark brown hair, and she's got the key in her mouth as well. I think she had a key in her mouth. Yeah.
First time in my life, I keep the lights on to keep when I'm alone. The great lyrics, yeah.
She was spooky in her own way as well.
Well, she was obviously inspired by that stuff too. You could tell.
She always looked like a Hammer girl to me in some of those movies.
Yeah, she did. She definitely went for that. Look, before she was like the goth chick before the goth chicks existed. And like a brand new washing machine that works first time every time, here is Sarah with the psychic hygiene report.
Following on from last episode's psychic hygiene regarding sprucing up to lift you up, I want to talk about happiness, even when those around you may not understand or support it. And it's important to continue to see that the powers that be manipulate and orchestrate our perceptions of the world through the media to maintain their control, and they thrive on keeping the masses in a perpetual state of fear or misery because it serves their agendas. And by growing this culture of fear and negativity, they can exert influence and retain dominance. But they have no influence over us when we're in a high frequency state, such as happiness. And when you start to feel joy, you might find that others may attempt to pull you back by suggesting that your joy is insincere, fleeting, or that you'll lose it, insinuating that there's no point in pursuing it. Those in your own circles may also attempt to diminish your happiness or distance themselves from you out of envy, suspicion, or because your contentment highlights their own lack of it. And as the saying goes, misery loves company, but happiness often stands alone. So what I'm suggesting is, despite these external influences, hold your head high in the joy of your own spirit and show the world that there's an alternative to pain. Be wary of not feeling obliged to partake in others' suffering in order to make a connection with them. And let me give you a relevant example of that involving toxic social media posts and our reaction to news events that are beyond our immediate concern or control. So you log on to your social media platform and your feed is inundated with negative and toxic posts. Take a side here, take a stance there. And it's tempting to get drawn into the cesspool by taking part in arguments or getting caught up in the collective outrage. But instead, consider this psychic hygiene tip and guard your psychic happiness. First, be aware of the toxicity, but don't allow it to dictate your emotions. These posts often start from the desire for attention and validation, or even simple virtue signaling. And by not succumbing to the emotional turmoil that people want to incite, you can keep your inner peace and balance. The media is filled with events from around the world, and some of these events can be really heartbreaking or distressing. And while it's important to stay informed and empathise with those affected, it's also important not to immerse yourself in the constant barrage of negative news. By staying informed and feeling empathy for those involved, you show a compassionate and caring attitude. However, don't allow yourself to become overwhelmed by this current media frenzy of misery that's beyond your immediate control. In both scenarios, the idea is to maintain your inner joy, peace, and clarity, even in the face of external negativity, so that by doing so, you not only safeguard your own psychic well-being, but also become a source of positive influence, inspiring others to find their joy and balance amid all this chaos. And that's my psychic hygiene suggestion for this week.
I think that's all very important, Sarah. Thank you for that. And it's very similar to my psychic weather report this week. I think we're in the same space regarding what needs to be done now to protect the human psyche.
Yeah, I just scrolling at the moment is just horrible. It's not enjoyable anymore. You've got to really, really curate your news feed. Otherwise, you just find yourself getting swept along in it. And even if you're not actively participating, if you're anything like me, something grabs your attention, excuse me, you have a look at the comments and then hours pass because you're reading people arguing and you're getting angry. And when the hours passed, you think, blimey, I've just lost an hour to this crap and I could have done something productive. And now I'm in a rush and on the last minute, and it's all because of some random on Facebook who I've allowed to get under my skin. And it needs to stop, and life can become a lot more peaceful and productive, and you can get more done if you just focus not on the world as such, but if we all focus on our own individual worlds, then and only then it might be some chance of a difference to be made.
Word up. And then the second topic tonight on this week's Hocus Focus I want to talk about female phantom ladies, but not just any women. Have you ever noticed how the female ghost is often associated with a color? We all know you have the ubiquitous white lady, very common in Britain and America, often haunts stately homes and old castles. But you have other types around the world. You have in Mexico the La Llorona, and she's part of that Mexican kind of dark religion, very close to the Santa Muerte type cult, and she's often seen in a similar kind of light. Now, the story of the ladies, whether they be the white lady, the gray lady, and believe it or not, there's even a brown lady and a red lady, is that they're often legends of a haunting associated with a tragic history. So, a lost lover and she commits suicide, or she dies somehow of a broken heart. And there's also the story that she will have suicided herself in order to avoid an arranged marriage with someone she wasn't attracted to. Then there's stories of ghostly women who are killed by their husbands, or they're murdered by Jack the Ripper type things, and so on. But the haunted phantom lady is nearly always associated with tragedy. Now, the white lady, which is very popular in both North America and Britain, is often associated, very similar to the Banshee of Ireland, with the foretelling of death. Now, the white lady concept itself comes from the medieval period in Europe, not just only in Britain or in England, but also in Europe. And she is very, very similar to the Banshee. In fact, when I was researching this and researching some of the stories of white ladies, I was constantly thinking of the Banshee. There was a famous story, well, an infamous and sad story here in Ireland, of about 20 years ago. A French TV producer, woman, was called Sophia de la Pontier, was murdered down in West Cork, and a documentary was made about her unsolved murder on Irish TV about a year or two ago. And people had said the night before she was murdered, she saw a white lady at a castle. And this was, and she thought it was the Banshee, but there's the castle that she saw, this specter and this phantom was associated with a white lady. Again, the foretelling of death, and again associated with a castle or a fortress or a stately home. Now, in Britain, in Northumbria, there is a place called Blenkinsop Castle. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Castle. And there's a white lady there. And apparently the legend is that there's a great fortune belonging to her that's still in the castle grounds, hidden and unfound. And she is actually protecting her hidden witches. And she's quite a commonly seen white lady, and is very strongly entrenched with the folklore of Northumbria. Also in England is Porchester Castle. And this is a stately home, again, associated with a white lady. And in this case, one of her children had fallen from the castle fortifications, the walls, and was killed. And then she was so brokenhearted, she died afterwards or killed herself, depending on the legend. And she haunts Porchester Castle to this day. Again, the theme of the stately home, the castle. Now, across in Mexico, there's an interesting story of the La Llorona, L-L-L-A, for second word, L-L-O-R-O-N-A. And she's doomed to walk the earth after she's a woman who was a beautiful young lady who was swept off her feet by a man. And as she aged, her husband has an affair with a much younger, beautiful woman, and she's replaced and she won't divorce him or leave him. So the husband murders her and her children, and she is off, and she is seen in Mexico as this phantom of tragedy, as tragic circumstances. Another interesting white lady that we never hear about, but she is seen, is the ghost of Anne Boleyn, the executed wife of Henry VIII. She's often seen both in London and in the Tower of London itself. And she, she was, one of the things she was tried was witchcraft towards the end. She was accused of, and she was a very interesting lady. And by all accounts, she may have studied the occult when she grew up in France. But her white lady ghost is often seen as well. Now, we're not limited just to the hue or the color white. Again, in Lincolnshire in England, we have the Black Lady of Bradley Woods. And it's a similar story again. She died of a broken heart because her husband and son were missing. They went into the woods and were never found. So she wanders into the woods looking for her missing husband and son, and she appears as a black lady inside the woods. There's the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall. Now, she's a famous one because there's a photograph of her ascending the stairs. You've probably all seen it. It's one of the most famous ghost photographs of all time. In 1936, her image was taken descending the stairs at Raynham Hall, and she has been seen by many guests at the actual location. The hall was very well patroned by the rich and the good and the great, and you had like everybody from royalty to politicians who claimed to have seen the Brown Lady, and not just on the photograph, but actually experienced her in the actual stately home. Again, it's interesting, isn't it, the stately home thing? Remember when Sarah did the thing on the Ghost Castles of Ireland, were very similar stories as well. In a previous episode of Hocus Pocus, there was the Grey Lady of Springwood, and that's a musical ghost. She actually sings, and music is heard. She's a gentle musical ghost. And then finally, a very interesting one that I find remarkable is the Lady in Red. She is associated with Alabama or some of the southern states of the US, and she's a spectral wraith. And she's a spectral wraith who has all kinds of stories attributed to her, all the ones you've mentioned, all the classic things: murdered by a husband, lost lover, suicide, dead child. But she's unique to the American Deep South, particularly Alabama, the Lady in Red. And she's different than the others in that she's not a phantom or a specter, but she's a wraith. So she has a very different energy and sort of presence about her, menacing, frightening, where all the other ones are either they're frightening because they foretell death or doom, or else they frighten people because they're specters. But in outside that, they don't bother anybody other than some people being afraid of ghosts. But the Lady in Red has a kind of a more sinister element towards her. And so that's the world of all these multi-hued female ghosts. Why women ghosts are associated with colors, I really don't know. And I think there's a bleed over here between ancient European folklore going into things like the banshee and similar types of things in both, Hellenic, Greek, Roman, Nordic. They've all got similar kind of ghostly female specters, similar to the banshee. So what do you think of this, Sarah?
I always thought perhaps that the colours might be concerned or associated with what happened to them in life. So the Red Lady, for example, is usually tales that are associated with passion and love, or even violence within a relationship. So the Red Lady is usually a spirit that's met a violent or tragic end due to a betrayal by a partner or an injustice. And even in life, red symbolizes intense emotions such as anger and revenge. So it could be that she's hanging around for revenge, whereas the White Lady is more purified and gentle. And it might not be so much revenge there. Something might have happened to her, but she just might be hanging around, just an innocent spirit, or even, as we've talked about so many times, a recording in the psychic geography, or like the stone tape theory,
there's a kind of a psychosocial aspect to it as well, in that more often than not, these women are members of the privileged class, the aristocracy, even Kathy in Wuthering Heights, that they were not, the poor. And with all their, it's almost like a soap opera ghost or something, with all their privilege and power in life, being the wife of a king or a prince or a nobleman or a lord, they still suffer terrible tragedies. It's almost like this paradox, this ironic dichotomy, that for all their privilege, the women of the gentry also suffer. That could be also the Anne Boleyn kind of thing too, as well. The death of Anne Boleyn. I'm not surprised she has a ghost associated with her, because of it's such an intense story. We should cover her in a future episode, a dedicated subject of Hocus Focus. But I do think it's ultimately rooted. The White Lady first appears in the medieval period. Now, a lot of the medieval period, a lot of what became the sort of Christianized folklore began then, but it was all based on pagan folklore. So you had things like the Grail romances that appeared around that period, and these kinds of things, and also the Germanic tales of the Wildenbicken, which we spoke about recently, and the Liebernungen, the Germanic tales, Siegfried and the giant worm and this kind of thing. And they were all pagan stories that had been Christianized, as we'll call them in the whole genre of Grail romances. And the Grey Lady I nearly bet, the White Lady, is based on an ancestral female spirit from pagan times that was Christianized and brought into a romantic kind of nature to them.
You've just put me in mind of a theory. Now, you'll have to maybe jog my memory. Me and you have wrote about it, and it's the theory, can't remember the name, but page 25 was missing.
Yes.
And what was that?
The gateway process.
That's it, the gateway process. And I think, if I remember rightly in my head, that proved, or that theorized, that events that happen in places like stately halls, wherever, the more traumatic they are, the more likely they are to be held within the psychogeography of a place, and therefore to be seen by people who are sensitive to that.
Yeah, well, the gateway process was designed, but was a report written for the CIA that took a lot of its work, a lot of its foundation from the Monroe Institute, Robert Monroe's work, which is ironic because they ridiculed it and then they actually put it in their own documents, regarding that the human mind could travel outside space-time. It's very similar to Strange Conflict, the Dennis Wheatley novel, Battles in the Astral Plane. And I think it was MacDonald was the name of the American general who was assigned with writing the report, and he had theorized. It was very interesting. It's unbelievable to think that it was 1982 that they were even writing stuff like this, that by means of a torsion field, you could extend beyond space-time through certain levels of concentration and partitioning of the mind. And then you could experience entities, as they called them, in other realms. So, I mean, that was the CIA, believe it or not, people doing that. But yeah, I mean, I was also thinking of the Marian apparitions too. Now, like at Fatima and Lourdes and at Knock here in Ireland. Now, I do absolutely believe that the woman Fatima was a jinn. The fact that if you read the original transcripts, they're nothing like what the Catholic Church said. It came out of a cave, a jinn, and created all these visions and everything. And it wasn't a beautiful, tall, white lady, and Lourdes she was. So that's another interesting aside, is how many Marian, and when you think about the Marian apparitions, what is she? She's a white lady, this kind of thing again. And what did she do at both Lourdes and, well, she didn't do it at Lourdes. What did she do at Fatima? She gave prophecy. She foretold prophecy, we're told anyway.
I've also heard that these white ladies, or some of them, wear gloves. You're seeing with different coloured gloves, and depending what colour the gloves are, is what she's portending. So if she's wearing black gloves, then she's bringing news of a death, which is like the banshees, I suppose, which is what they do, albeit through the wailing.
Yeah, and then there's Kathy from Wuthering Heights. She became a white lady, wandering the moors looking for Heathcliff. So, I mean, again, it has a tremendous romantic tragedy written around it as well.
I've got some more unusual coloured phantoms here.
Excellent.
I picked up from around the internet, and we've got blue ladies, which are, well, the spirits that appear in blue colours as well. And a place called Port Arthur is haunted by many ghosts, but one of them is a lady dressed in a greyish blue dress. And she's believed to be the spirit of a young woman who died during childbirth. And then you've got a pub called the Story Inn in Nashville, Indiana, and that's haunted by a blue lady. And she's believed to have been the wife of a Dr. George Story who founded the town. And there's hundreds of documented encounters with this blue lady, but she's not referred to this colour for her dress. It's more for her hypnotic blue eyes. And a place called MacPike Mansion is haunted by a blue lady wearing a blue dress, and she's been seen coming down the stairs, and she arrives in the middle of many tours that when people are going around the stately home, and she's not shy. Apparently she'll show herself. And then we've got the Purple Lady of the Rio Grande Depot, and the Rio Grande Depot is a historic tram depot in Utah which dates back to 1910, and there's been lots of sightings of a purple ghost who is known as the Purple Lady. She is believed to be a woman who was killed on the tracks. And the story goes that she and her fiance were having an argument at some point, and her engagement ring was thrown onto the tracks in a moment of anger. And the woman was clearly in tears and distraught, so she climbed down onto the rails to get the ring, but she was hit by the train and instantly killed. And this Purple Lady...
That is a sad story.
Yes, it is. She's been seen around the station, on the tracks and the platform, and in the cafe and the restrooms or the toilets. And people have also heard her singing, and they've heard her footsteps. So that's a very haunting one. That's almost White Lady caliber, that one. And then we've got the Woman in Beige. We've even got beigedom in this topic. Can't escape beige. The Virginian Hotel was opened in 1911 and constructed by a man named August Grimm. And the hotel was much too big and too luxurious. And today it closed down because it was out of place. And today it's a famous historic landmark, but it's also haunted, and it has a female ghost called the Woman in Beige, who is still sitting where the lobby was, waiting for her husband to return. He was supposed to arrive by train, but he never came back. And the story goes that the Woman in Beige threw herself out of a third-floor window and fell to her death, and she has been seen many times. So they all seem to be tragic stories attached to these women phantoms of different colours.
Very romantic, very gothic, very
yes.
Emily Bronte, Charlotte Bronte, that kind of vibe.
And then going back to the castles, we talked about the Irish castles in the first season of Hocus Focus, and that's got a red lady. Leap Castle has a red lady, and the castle is haunted by loads of ghosts, as we've already discussed, but she apparently is a scary one. She's been seen by many people, and she haunts the entire castle, but's been seen most frequently in the Blue Room, which used to be a nursery. And she's tall, lean, and she has long brown hair, and she always carries a dagger ready to strike. And it's believed that she was an involuntary guest of the O'Carroll clan, but most likely she got pregnant by one of the wayward sons or even the husband. And the O'Carrolls either killed the child or she was killed while she was trying to escape. Another tragic one.
That's the thing. Mostly stately homes or grand domiciles like the big hotel you mentioned, and tragedy, and a lot of childbirthy ones too as well.
Makes you glad to be living in your, well, it does me, to be living in my little rundown house in the back arse of nowhere, really. I don't know about you.
I know. I wouldn't want to. We spoke about we did the haunted castles of Ireland episode, and we had loads of theories on why the castles attract ghosts, but a lot of these ones are not actually like military castles. They're stately homes, so they didn't have wars or anything in them or anything like that. Well, some of them did, like Lep Castle, but other ones are just stately homes. But
Got
it's
another white.
interesting how
Sorry.
they're cultural. They're cultural, American, mostly in the Anglo world. Okay, some of these white ladies, they are often painted in their, their official portraits that were done when they were alive, in kind of ghostly ways. If you look at the brushwork and how they were done, like the brown lady of, Raynham Hall. Now they call it the brown lady, but she's here. She is here. I know that style of art was how they did it back then, but she looks kind of ghostly, and a lot of paintings look like that. And I wonder how many of the look. This is the Duchess of Bolton, who was also considered a white lady. Now look at her painting. She looks like a ghost.
She does look like a ghost. Yeah, very silvery and misty.
Yes, it's silvery. Yeah. So I often wonder how many of the paintings inspired these the colors of the women that what they were wearing at the time and stuff.
Stirling Castle in Scotland is full of ghosts. We've got a black lady there, a pink lady, and a green lady.
Oh, so Stirling Castle made up the colors that were missing.
Like
Black,
Joseph's Technicolor Dreamcoat, yeah.
Yeah.
What have we got? We've got the green lady. She's been spotted. She waits at the top of the steps that used to be the military base of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. And she was seen gliding down the steps in flowing green finery, and she was devastatingly beautiful. Luckily, she seemed to have been in a benevolent mood that day and simply passed through the young soldier who saw her.
That must be some experience.
Lady in pink, or rather a pink aura permeating the kirkyards around the castle. And this lady, or this pink aura, manifests into a lady and as a sense of longing and unrequited love felt by people walking by there. And some think she was a woman whose sweetheart died prematurely in battle, and the poor soul is now doomed to roam the earth full of the passion unfulfilled in life.
Yeah, you get a lot of that, like soldiers' wives.
But all tragic stories.
Yeah.
One of them. So living in a stately home is not all it's cracked up to be.
They should really be called the Phantom Technicolor widows for the most part. That's what they are.
Yeah. And I do wonder, are they phantoms and ghosts or are they recordings? I don't know. Is it just their heartache and emotion that's been recorded within these stone walls? And
I think that's the latter. I think the latter is correct for most of them, but I also think some of them could be fairies.
right. Yeah, because it's not all going to be the same thing, is it? It's going to be different explanations for different ones.
Yeah, but I think overall, it's probably stone tape theory time and the tragedy embedded into the subatomic fabric of the stonework.
You hear stories of lots of truck drivers or motorists driving down lonely roads, don't you, who encounter a white lady on the road and she stops right in front of them and makes them swerve off the road.
That happened to a friend of mine years ago, a guy that was a singer in a band that I was in. He lived on Staten Island, which is the kind of, well, it was even from the 80s, the rural part of New York City. Even though it's a borough, at the very back of it, it might as well be the countryside. And he was telling me that him and a friend, a Puerto Rican taxi driver, was picking him up from a nightclub or something and drove them home to where they lived on Staten Island. And they saw a spectral black lady, like from plantation slave times, like Roots, dressed like that, and they nearly ran off the road. And the Hispanic guy was blessing himself frantically, going, It's a ghost. It's a ghost, man. That was a ghost. That was a ghost. I'm not going down here anymore, man. And this kind of thing. And he said that she looked right into their eyes, and she was dressed in like old time, like we'd see in the TV show, Color Purple or Roots or something.
Yeah. While I was reading about these phantom ladies over the week, like I said a few episodes ago, it's getting more and more difficult to rely on the internet for this stuff. So we should rely on our books more, but sometimes we have to go on the internet and have a look. And I found, I'm not going to go into it, I'll give it any energy, but I'll just briefly tell you, there was so much woke stuff and feminist stuff about the females in the afterlife that I quickly switched off. And I thought, my God, it's seeped into this as well, about just awful. That's all I'm going to say. If you want to know what rabbit hole that goes down, then it's not one that I stuck my face in and I took it out.
I use my old books and 14 times in magazines for mine. I think I have a personal story too. About when I was about 17, 16, we were camping up near the Hellfire Club in Dublin in the woods there, Massey's Wood, which is full of like the ruins of an old stately home. And also people live up there still, like there's cottages in the woods and stuff. And it's a weird place. There's lots of hippies and cults and odd stuff goes up there. But we were camping in the woods. We'd lit a bonfire and we were cooking hot dogs around it, sausages on a frying pan, sorry. And this woman carrying a baby in a shawl walked just past us like she didn't know we were there. Now, she wasn't ghostly or spectral. And we said, hello, how are you? And she didn't respond to us. And this walked towards a house that was in the distance. And it was just really weird. What was she doing in the woods that late at night? Now, there was houses not too far away and things like that. But what was she doing in the woods late that night with a baby wrapped up in a shawl, ignoring us? Now, she didn't seem like a ghost to me. She seemed like a real person. There was a presence there of a human. But that was a weird experience up in those mountains. Well, I had several weird experiences up in those mountains, but that was a weird experience up in those mountains that could have been in that category. Maybe, I don't know.
Could have been a fairy, that.
I did a painting of it too as well. That was quite good. I'll have to dig it out sometime. But yeah.
Could have been a fairy. We had a white lady story here when we was kids. Now I don't know if I never saw it. Don't know if it was true or if it was just one of those things that the adults told you to keep you out of empty buildings. But there's a big white house not too far away, and it's quite stately. And it was owned by a local millionaire, and he let it go to rack and ruin on purpose because he used it for his pigeons. It's like a 6-7 bedroomed house. And he was so rich, he had it as a pigeon coop because he loved his pigeons. And it was really spooky. I mean, I can't, if I took a photograph of it now, somebody lives in it now. So it's not got the same ambience. This was like 1985. And the local story was that at 9:30 every night, a white lady would come out from the top window, walk down the stairs because you could see the stairs because there was no windows in this thing, and come out and cross the road and stand in front of you. And I think, I never saw it, but I have a feeling that was to make sure that we were home by 9:30 and not hanging about. Don't know.
Yeah, you don't know. In Japan, in the area in Fukushima where they had the tsunami and all those people died, for years afterwards, and I think probably still goes on, taxi drivers pick up phantom hitchhikers, and they're nearly always women.
And bus drivers.
They're always women. Yep.
Yeah. Strange. It must be some traumatic. I think it is some traumatic. For a lot of them, it's some traumatic ending that's either trapped them here because they've got unfinished business, or they're not aware that they're dead.
Yeah, and they don't see reality the way we do.
Yeah, so they could be getting on with it in their own dimension.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. But it's interesting that's always women.
Yes, it is. Yes, because you don't hear of the purple man or the man in white or the man in red.
Unless they're real things like folklore things like the Green Man or the Green Knight. but you don't know. You never do. It's always a female, huh?
Yeah, very odd.
Fascinating.
Interesting topic. Loads of stories about them if you can sift through all the rubbish on the internet.
Yeah. You want to go to old websites, say you can go to GeoCities archive, which exists on the internet.
I'm
I
going to
think
write that down.
it's OO Cities, I think is the name of it. And some kid in America or somewhere had saved and archived all the GeoCities websites. So you want to go back and look at the internet when it was a beautiful place and get when it was really good 14 content. That's all there.
That got the 90s vibe to it.
Yeah, it's GeoCities archive, and I think it's on Internet Archive. We'll just type GeoCities archive in it, you'll find it.
Right, I'll have a look at that. Yeah. Like I say, I'm like you. I do use my books, but sometimes you do need to go and have a look around and weed out the creepy pasta and all the rubbish that's out there.
Yeah, I know. It's awful the way that the woke thing has infiltrated so much stuff.
Yeah.
But it's temporary and it's not the world that we're concerned with.
No, we'll just keep going through it with our scythe and keep bringing
we are the archivists of the future. So that's the grey lady, the white lady, the pink lady, the polka dot lady, whatever you're having yourself. Very interesting topic, very voluminous and numerous and a full topic that seems to cover everywhere. I'd like to hear, especially from people that are not from the Anglosphere that you have, if you live in Holland or if you live in Germany or if you live in Italy, Belgium, Scandinavia, anywhere. Do you have a similar tradition of a lady of a particular you that's part of the spirit world?
Here at Hocus Focus, we don't predict rain or shine, but rather cosmic alignments and energy vibes. It's like your typical weather report, but with a side of sixth sense and a rain shower of Renfielding here and there. So put your weather apps away and prepare to be amazed by your very own psychic weatherman. Mr. Thomas Sheridan is here with the psychic weather.
And this week's psychic weather report is do not fall into someone else's abyss. Just because the weight of the world exists, just because the darkness of the world outside is there, does not mean that compassion equals you throwing yourself into that void. And it's very important in a moment to understand that what happens on the other side of the world is not your concern. It does not, unless it affects members of your family who might be out there or something, it is an acquired hardship. It is an imported trauma. You wouldn't know about it if there was no electricity and there was no internet and no television and no radio and no newsprint. Think about that one. So what makes you believe that you are under some kind of obligation to be traumatized and disturbed by something that in the time of your grandparents, they probably wouldn't have known about it, at least for a few weeks later, or great-grandparents, we should say. And that's important to know that we live in an age where misery and company can happen in a microsecond right around the globe. It doesn't mean you have to be cold. It doesn't mean you have to be, aloof to it. It means that you can only defend and protect so much within you. Your own psychic space, your own family, your own community, and your own nation. You cannot throw yourself into the abyss of another part of the world, especially if there's nothing you can do about it. Why deplete your own psychic energy? Why take science in someone else's world when you've got enough problems in your own life to contend with and other things you need to do? And if you don't have too many problems, you have tons of things you can create, learn, and be enchanted by. Do not allow the trauma vampires in the media or online to make you feel obligated to be part of something, and to throw your psychic energy and your emotions into something that you on no level can change, and you as a person as have no direct connection through to your, unless your family is there or something. Otherwise, note it and then move on. And that's a psychic weather this week. Do not fall into someone else's abyss, because you know what? It's not your abyss, and if you fall into it, there'll be no one there to pull you out of it. And that's the psychic weather.
Spot on. Someone said to me, you can't sit on the fence with this. And I said, oh, I can. And I will, because I'll sit on this fence until my ass is full of splinters, because I'm not getting off it. I'm not interested. I'd rather have splinters in my ass than fall into somebody else's abyss.
It's not like the Rona and the transubstantiation of the sacred needle card. That came to our front doors. That came to our businesses. That came to our families, our homes, our social lives, our streets, our neighbours and friends. This isn't.
And sitting on the fence and keeping quiet about it, it doesn't mean you've not got an opinion on it and you don't care. It just means that you choose not to voice that opinion in the media frenzy that's going on now, because it's not going to make any difference. It's not going to change anything. It's just going to make you really miserable. And probably you'll be a Belisha beacon to every gene-infected truther that's out there trawling the internet at the moment, because it's an easy all-you-can-eat buffet.
You have enough shit to deal with in your own community. You don't need to be looking overseas for it. Simple as that.
You just need to go in the supermarkets and have a look in there at the prices if you want to see some trouble at home.
Oh, absolutely. I know we're going off topic here, but it's important we bring this up. That's something you should be concerned with budgeting, because inflation is absolutely psychotic at the moment.
Yeah, and if you can afford to put a few extra quid on your groceries, then get a few extra items, dried items, tinned items that are on offer or in the sale, or on the, as we call it over in the UK, the whoops aisle, because they have the yellow stickers on that say whoops, because they're just about to go past the best before date. So grab a few of them and get a stockpile going.
Act locally and save your own ass at home.
Now it's time for our weekly 40 Bookshelf Showdown, the segment where we dig deep into our own private bookshelves and pull out those hidden gems that we've collected over the years. We've got books on the unexplained, the occult, the mystical, and everything in between. And it's a bit like our very own 40 version of the Antiques Roadshow, only without the teapots. And we can't afford David Dickinson either, so sorry about that. Anyway, in my book this week, I have chosen the Book of Druidry by Ross Nichols, and I'll put the picture up on the screen because it's shining. And I bought this at the Mysterious Earth conference, and I've just finished reading it, and it was from a lovely man, and I've forgotten his name. I've got his card, it's in my purse. I should have brought it. I'll put it on the screen, but he deals in occult books, and I can't get Ray's occult books out of my head, but that's Ghostbusters. It wasn't Ray. Do you remember his name, Thomas? It was the really nice guy with the long white hair and beard. He was stood near the shelf. You muted? No, okay. Anyway, the Book of Druidry by Ross Nichols. It's a great book, and it's all about his deep connection to the ancient Druid order, and he's left us a absolute treasure trove of wisdom before his unexpected passing in 1975. And this book is the collection of a lifetime devoted to the Druid path. And after he died, his teachings were almost lost to history. They nearly got thrown out with the bin men, but thankfully they were rescued. And eventually the book and the papers were rediscovered, and it brought about a revival and the publication of this remarkable volume. And the book goes from the Druids' earliest historical roots to the more modern renaissance of Druidry, and it looks at Druidic ideas, the deities and the myths, and their own learning systems and their way of life. And it also explores the connection to legends like Arthur and the Grail, and the mystery of the Druid egg and the symbolism of the serpent. And it also has a section on dolmens, barrows, stone circles, and Nichols explains their significance and how these ancient sites were at the heart of Druidry. Now, the author has combined 3 books into one with this book, and it is a historical account of Druidry, a guide to 13 ancient sites within Britain, and an anthology of Druidic wisdom. And the historical section gives you some ideas and insights into who the Druids were and what they have evolved into today. Bearing in mind, this was published in 1975. The Guide to Ancient Sites, while they are informative as a standalone book, it does recommend that when you read about the ancient sites, that you do pay a visit to each one that he mentions after reading. And lastly, there's the anthology of Druidic wisdom, which is great for those people who want to go deeper into the teachings. And I particularly like the section on the 8-fold year plan, which is a way that the Druids organise and celebrate important moments throughout the year. And it's a calendar with 8 special days based on nature and the changing seasons. And they just mark key times like the solstices and the equinoxes, and Imbolc, Beltane, Lammas, and Samhain. And the book goes into these things much deeper than I have time to go into here. And it is a very informative book where Nichols's legacy definitely comes alive and lives on in its pages. And there are photographs as well.
I love that cover. It reminds me of J.R. Tolkien's artwork. Yeah, I love that cover.
So that is the Book of Druidry. Highly recommended.
My book this week is Sorcery and Religion in Ancient Scandinavia by Varg Vikernes. Do you know who Varg Vikernes is, Sarah?
Hubard Vikrams.
Yeah, Vikernes. Do you know who he is?
No, I don't. Not by the name.
Well, to describe the intensity of this book, I have to give you a short bio of the man. Varg Vikernes was one of the founders of the Norwegian black metal scene back in the early 90s. He played bass on the first Mayhem album, and he went on to form his own band called Burzum, which he played all the instruments in. Now, he's famous or infamous for 2 things. He was connected with the burning of churches in Trondheim in Norway, and also the murder of the guitar player. Well, he was charged with murder, but he maintains it was a manslaughter through a fight of the guitar player Euronymous from Mayhem. He stabbed him in the head with a knife. They had a fight on the steps of his apartment. He got a hefty prison sentence of 21 years. Now, the band Burzum were amazing. The album Philoferm, and has the greatest opening of any song I've ever heard. Dunkelheit, which is of any metal album. It's that colossal black metal sound, but it's beautiful and symphonic and everything. That kind of describes his attitude towards what he writes about. He writes about paganism, ancient religions, and even things like megaliths. I have a couple of his books. He also has a very popular role-playing game called My Fartog. He wrote all these while he was in prison. He was in prison until 2007. I don't play the role-playing game, but I like reading them as fiction. But in Sorcery in Scandinavia, he takes the concept of the Norse religion, mythology, paganism, back to a very primal root, way back, and that's what I like about it. It's very intense. He researched a lot of this stuff while he was in prison and took the notes down to write these books, I reckon. And within sorcery and religion in ancient Scandinavia, he tackles the mythology, the gods, the goddesses of the Nordic world in a very kind of new way, a very deep way, actually. Very, he brings it back to there's lots of things we don't necessarily see. I guess he's doing on a deeper level what I did with the Druid Code. It's like get the Christian editorialization out of the way and get deep into the real thing. And he talks about things like the sanctity of the dead, rites surrounding the dead, and the true meaning of all these different things. That these stories that have often been turned into silly fairy stories by the Christian authors of the Eddas and the sagas, and the Volksburger, he turns them into, he pulls them back to a primal root. And I found the book very interesting if you want to sort of get to, like our friend Fiona today made a post on Facebook about shamanism within the Nordic cultures. And there's hints of it there. And a lot of this book kind of covers that kind of thinking. And I suggested maybe look into Ugaric or Sami shamanism for a hint. So it goes into a very deep place. It's not your normal dive into Nordic paganism or ancient Scandinavian religion. It goes way back in, and he talks about a lot of things about burial mounds, what they call burial mounds and tumulus and passage entrance. He mentions, things like, I'll give you an example. The egg gemstones, there are many interesting archaeological finds which support my hypothesis and interpretations. The oldest are probably cave paintings found in France, in Chave and in Lacau, which are respectively about 35,000 and 20,000, 10,000 years old, where sorcerers with great skill have painted hunting scenes on the cave walls, probably as part of their hunting spells. Another ancient evidence of European religion's old age is the 5,000-year-old burial mound in Ireland called Newgrange, but originally called Sid in Bucha, the entrance to the underworld, where each sunrise in the winter, the solstice sunlight shines in the innermost chamber. Everywhere in Europe, from the Stone Age to the Iron Age, evidence can be understood in context with their ancient religion. In Scandinavia, we have up to 6,200-year-old rock carvings and remains of men and women from the Bronze and Iron Age found murdered and immersed in bogs. We have everything from burial mounds, ship graves, and rock carvings to runic inscriptions. All of this can be understood in the light of ancient religion. So what he's doing is kind of developing a very, very ancient, antiquated sort of like software to understand, or framework is a better word, to understand the depth of sorcery and religion in ancient Scandinavian stories. So if you've read the Eddas and you've read, the Valspusa saga and all these other, great Scandinavian epics, and then want to kind of a deeper, more intense philosophical dive into it, I recommend this book. I enjoyed this book very, very much, and I found it very helpful in my own insights into trying to understand ancient Celtic religion beyond the Christian editorialization from the Middle Ages. So Sorcery and Religion in Ancient Scandinavia by Varg Vikernes.
That sounds like a perfect book to read now that I finished the book of Druidry, because it's a similar thing, but it's Scandinavian. It's an ancient religion that he goes into the deep philosophy of.
Yeah, but it's a darker, it's a more, intense, darker thing. And it's very kind of like, it's funny. He grew up obsessed with Dungeons and Dragons games and role playing games and this kind of thing before he got onto the metal scene, and that shows in his music, but also shows in his writing. There's a lot of correlations between my Fartog, his RPG manual, if I can get this on camera, and the actual lore behind this and his attitude towards ancient Scandinavia. when you go back into the ancient Scandinavian, Germanic, Nordic thing, and I've been recently studying the Gretz of southern Sweden in great detail, who are like where the story Beowulf originates from, and the Celtic and the Germanic and the Scandinavian, they seem to blend together into a proto-European shamanic tradition, and that's with a small s, but they seem to come from the similar primal source, in that it was ancestor communication, that the relationship between death and birth were very powerful. The concept of the birthing and the dying inside these tumuli, and so on, that death was not necessarily seen as a terrifying thing, and it was seen as a rite of passage. And the only book he said that it was any use to him in his own work was The Golden Bough, and some obscure book which about Norwegian called Essential Cults in Norway, but I don't think there's an English version of that. The Golden Bough is another book that I should feature on my favorite books at some point by Fraser. But yeah, I mean, yeah, Varg Vikernes, a lot of people have trouble with him. I don't have any problem with him. I find him quite an interesting character, and he's brought a lot of new thinking to the table on these subjects that are very important.
We have a couple of Tulmani near where I go walking, and they are full of Brigantes and Romans. There's two big mounds there from the Bronze Age when there was a big fight there, a big war. And they all got thrown off the edge of it's a quarry now, but it was a cliff there back then.
Yeah, the Brigantes were in Ireland too as well. They were a Celtic Romanized tribe.
Yeah, it's quite a place to go and walk by and sit by. It's very, very powerful.
Yeah, and like in all these books, he, like anyone else's books, he draws comparisons with other mythologies and things like that, and that's what I like about him as well. But it's actually a short read. It's you could read it in a couple of nights. But he's got an interesting take on the runes, and a lot of our things about the Nordic world are kind of romantic artwork from the Victorian period. He shows there's a lot of those images for the sake of illustration published in this book, but in reality he's diving deeper behind that, and he even uses the antiquated spellings of things like Odin and Thor and Balor and all these kinds of, not Balor but Balder, and all these other kinds of things. But I read this, it's been a while since I read this, about 4 or 5 years, but I want to dive into it again. And prophecy, he talked about the real meaning of prophecy and things like that. Yeah, it's definitely one if you're interested in in something that's not flowery, and a bit of a dark dive, but an important one. I definitely recommend that for your collection.
We hope you've enjoyed this evening's episode and keep that sense of curiosity alive. And remember, the extraordinary is always just around the corner if you look. But before we go, I want to give another thank you for sharing your time with us this Sunday evening. And if you've enjoyed yourself, don't forget to show your support by liking, sharing and subscribing to the channel. We've got the Hocus Focus store link in the comments, as well as the affiliate links to this week's book reviews if you wish to purchase them via our links. I've got 2 Caffeine Chronicle chats to film and produce, another Witching Hours currently being put together. And also, Christian Morris, if you're watching, I'm going to be in touch with you soon regarding an idea that I need your expertise on from your teaching days. So if I
got his approval on that. He's on board.
Okay, yeah. That's great. Say no more, wait and see. It's a secret, but all will be revealed in good time. What else can I share with you? We've got friends coming over from Italy to stay with us in a couple of weeks' time. So I'm going to be busy swapping 40 hats and writing hats and the hostess with the mostess hats like crazy for a while. And if whatever this is doesn't sod off, I'll put a few episodes of Ivor the Engine on and hope that makes me feel better. But I won't say any more about that. I know Thomas has a few speaking gigs coming up soon, but we will find the time to put together a Yuletide special of Hocus Focus and also our 40th review of the year. And don't forget, next week is Halloween, and we'll be sure to keep it festive for you. And it's also the end of the month next week, and that means it'll be time for Olivia from Sun Moon Self to give us the astrological forecasts for the month of November. And now I'll shut up and let Thomas get a word in edgeways.
Yeah, this Sunday I am speaking at the Alternative View 13 conference in Milton Keynes. I'm sure some of you will be there, so we'll have a little bit of chat and a bit of hangout there. I have a speaking engagement in November in County Kerry, in West Cork. If you live near Kerry, it's close by, and the details of that are on my Substack page. And we're working on, no promises yet, a Hocus Focus event in England in the new year. An actual Hocus Focus conference is in the works in England, hopefully in the south of England in the early spring. Early days yet, but fingers crossed. I'm sure you'll be excited about that, and that's why we're holding off the release of the book to see if we can arrange it to have a book launch event in England as well as the first kind of Hocus Focus con there. So that should be fun. HoCFoCon, or whatever you want to call it. And again, sorry, like Sarah said at the beginning, we didn't have an episode last week, but we're all human. As you can see, she's still struggling a bit with a virus, and hopefully Ivor the Engine will pull out of his shed and do some shunting around her immune system. And the next thing is, that was a lovely cartoon, by the way. I used to think that was a lovely, sweet cartoon, Ivor the Engine.
Ivor the Engine with his lovely.
And they had the Welsh accents. The boy, oh, what did you know? Are we going down the valleys? Yeah. So now Sarah with the tarot.
And that lovely trombone introduction it had as well. I remember that. Well, this week's tarot of the week is the Fool. And the Fool is one of the most iconic cards in the Rider-Waite tarot deck. And the Fool marks the beginning of a new journey of consciousness and learning. And this card is about being in a state of pure potential, a fresh start, and a departure from the past. And the Fool stands for the concept of zero, which is neutral and symbolizes the cosmic egg, which contains all things before being manifested into creation. And on the card, the Fool is shown standing on the edge of a cliff with his gaze cast upward towards the sky, and he carries a small satchel, a white rose in his left hand, and a wand in his right hand. And his clothing is colourful and symbolic, representing various aspects of his previous journeys. And the yellow circles on his cloak all represent previous journeys too. And there is a flame in one of the circles here, and that represents the Fool's spirit. Now, the yellow in the card represents both the universe and the breath of life. And he has yellow hair and yellow boots, which brings into play as above and so below. And as such, the Fool represents the totality of everything. The sun is shining there at a 45-degree angle, and that means it never stops shining or illuminating on the Fool, and that keeps him going through all his adventures. He's got a green wreath on his head, which means growth, gained wisdom, all through the absorption of the sun's life energy. His black cloak that he's got around him represents the option to shed ignorance at any time, as well as using it to protect him when it's appropriate. A bit like with the toxic social media posts, really. You can use your cloak of ignorance to just become invisible. And you can see there is one step available for the Fool still to take before he reaches that cliff's edge. And that shows that there are infinite possibilities in life, if you want to go big, in the universe, yet to be explored. And that extra step he hasn't taken yet is all about how you will never reach your limit when it comes to all possibilities available to you. And he's accompanied by a small white dog representing his intellect. And the dog is very well trained and sat down quiet and obedient, not like my dog. I thought I'd just add here, showing us that we are not our intellect and we should use it as needed, but we shouldn't allow it to control us. And the fool carries this magic wand, which signifies occult knowledge, and it's a tool through which he directs his will into new endeavours and new journeys and achievements. He's got a red purse hanging from his wand, and that contains all his collected wisdom and his memories from the past adventures that he's been on. And as an opposite to that, the thorns on the white rose that he's got in his left hand represent all the challenges and obstacles that he's had to go through on previous journeys. And that reminds us that learning involves overcoming difficulties. And incidentally, the white rose is symbolic of his innocence and desire to start a new unknown chapter. And in this reading, the fool represents the possibility of a new adventure, an exciting but perhaps intimidating journey into the unknown, sometimes often referred to as the dark night of the soul. And if this is where you are, then the fool's message is to find your direction, but travel lightly. Your intellect and wisdom should guide you rather than control you as you go forward into new experiences. And you might feel unsure, but remember, mentioned this before, that the fool, paradoxically, is the one who carries the most wisdom of them all. And while others may be stuck in convention and routine, the fool has the courage to step off the beaten track and take risks and explore uncharted territories. And in doing so, they gain insights and wisdom that others might miss. And the fool is usually the one who sees through the bullshit. And as such, people misunderstand the fool as being foolish, but nothing could be further from the truth.
Carl Jung referred to the fool card as the infant ego stepping into consciousness, and I always loved that. Le Mat, as the French call it in the Tarot de Marseille. Yeah, it's a wonderful card. Thank you for that, Sarah, and good night, everybody.
Good night and see you next week.